So good day, everybody. Welcome to our February monthly FxD meeting. My name is Jenna Mikas. I'm the host of this community and I'm excited to see you all here. I think I know most of you. So let's go ahead and just get started and dive on in. And like I said before, if you want to say hello in the chat, feel free to do so. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which I live, work, and research, the Wurundjeri people. I pay respect to their elders, lores, customs, and creation spirits, and I recognize that these lands were never ceded. So today we are joined by three powerhouse academics who specialize in built environment science, architecture, and engineering for well-being, healthy buildings, kind of however you want or prefer to phrase it. We have positioned the subject matter as building science-based flourishing by design to intimate at two different perspectives, really. So one that's more focused on building or built environment related science, and then another that's more about building up or contributing to the scientific foundation of flourishing scholarship. So we have these three lovely speakers. Everybody should be spotlit so you can see them there. Our three speakers are Professor Chris Candido of the University of Melbourne, Professor Marcella Ucci of the University College London, or UCL, and Associate Professor Rianne Appel-Meulenbroek of Eindhoven University of Technology. Hello, ladies. All right, so I'll go through the quick plan and then we'll dive in with the presentations. The plan is really to have all three presenters speak for about 10 to 12 minutes-ish on the topic of their choosing. I will introduce each of them formally just before they present, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions at the very end once all have spoken. So make sure to take notes or enter questions in the chat or within the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window along the way. That way you'll have questions ready for the speakers individually or as a group once presentations conclude later. We're going to be capturing questions via chat and QA box, like I said, but also verbally if possible at the end. So it's going to be kind of using a first come, first serve or first in, best dressed approach. So just keep that in mind. So let's begin with Chris's introduction. And to do that, I'm going to unspotlight the other ladies. Let me go ahead and do that. Let's see how savvy I can be with tech today. All right, so we're going to begin with Professor Chris Candido. Her talk title is Designing Well, the Value Add of Implementing Health and Wellbeing Strategies. Professor Candido is an architect with a PhD in civil engineering from the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil and in environmental science from Macquarie University in Australia. Her research interest and expertise relate to design, experience, and performance of spaces. Her projects and publications are related to the fields of post-occupancy evaluation, indoor environmental quality, new ways of working and learning, and climate-responsive design in tropical and subtropical climates. Professor Candido directs the SHE Lab, which stands for Sustainable and Healthy Environments. The SHE Lab develops a program of applied research aimed at understanding how the built environment can improve sustainability and health. Professor Candido works closely with the Green Building Council of Australia, GBCA, the National Australian Built Environment Rating System, NABERS, and the International Wellbuilding Institute, IWBI. And she's also a WELL faculty member. And without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and give it to you, Chris.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for the opportunity to, join this wonderful group of academics who I admire dearly. My talk today is really trying to bring some of the lessons learned from workplaces within the APAC region and, trying to get to really the value add of implementing health and well-being design strategies, particularly within workplaces. This talk draws a lot in the book that we just published recently, the Routledge Handbook of High Performance Workplaces. We had the privilege to have 30 authors joining the conversation, 22 women, which I'm very proud of, as you would know. We have representatives from 5 different countries, but also we made sure that we had the industry voice, because I think actually establishing opportunities for this conversation to take place between academics such as ourselves, but also industry is critical. To advance, implement advanced practice in advanced science. The book has been integrated as part of the Transdisciplinary Workplace Management series, which is led by Rianne and Lydia, and it's free. So if you want to learn more about the work that we do within the lab and beyond, then please feel free to just have a look at the book online. So where is the context? Everything that I'll be talking about it here is very much coming from corporate high-end workplaces within the APAC region with a pre-majority representation from Australia. The Australian workplaces are very well known for having experimentation, high expectations, being data-driven and risk-takers as part of their DNA, and that is front and center from a design to back the house, like workplace strategy and so on and so forth. It's a very competitive market. How we did it, mostly of the work is driven by the uptake of post-occupancy evaluation surveys, specifically the SHE post-occupancy evaluation survey led by the lab. And we try to innovate and actually try to capture data from building occupants. Yes, touching on metrics that are very classic that industry loves. I don't believe in them, but we still do them, such as productivity. All the way through the spectrum of satisfaction, but also introducing new measures such as creativity, physical health, and mental health through the survey work. Why are we doing this? We also seeing there is why is the market doing that? So why is the market actually embracing design for health and well-being? There is this pretty significant, substantial, and you can't ignore change in expectations, and it has been ticking along over time. Specifically, design for health and well-being is something that we've been doing this for many years now, but post-COVID, of course, that became front of mind. So not only was something that was a nice to have before, now it became a must-have. And I would actually say it's very quickly becoming baseline practice, at least within the Australian high-end workplace setting. The ones that are doing well, they are actually implementing that as part of the footprint and the DNA of the organization. So it's not doing just for the sake of doing, it is actually part and integral to the ways of working. So it really underpins a much bigger and broader agenda and ambition that is, of course, boils down to keeping the best talent and attracting the best talent, making sure that they don't leave the organizations, not out of goodness of their heart. But then that can only be achieved fully if that is really part of the way of working, and not just, a tick on the box through a design perspective, for example. The ones that are doing really well, they also integrate that as part of the space design. And good design, in this particular case, leads the way. So we see a very strong correlation in terms of good design practice, a good interior design practice, which inevitably will lead to high performance workplaces across the board. So there is a lot of conversation around acoustics, for example, within open plan office as being, of course, the forever Achilles heel. What we see is that spaces that actually have the ambition of design for health and well-being, that put good design practices front and center to what they're trying to achieve, they actually tend to have a much better performance in terms of not only indoor environmental quality, but everything else that comes attached to that. And that is because the interior design of these spaces actually cater for the needs of people that are working at the time that they're working. And they're also going a step further to actually make sure there is flexibility implemented within the designs to evolve. And that's particularly important, of course, in the context that we're dealing with now. Organizations that are achieving that and doing really well, they also have science to inform, they make sure that they have science to inform all the decision making. If you take biophilic design principles, for example, which is not news to anyone, I suppose, in this call, I think there is a lot of emphasis now in actually trying to expand from, what are the benefits that come from how we actually assess that. So expanding how we collect the data and methodology that we have been using. So there is a really increased emphasis in actually going beyond the post-occupancy evaluation, subjective ways of assessing how people engage with these spaces and where the benefits are coming from, to actually have hard metrics around space utilization, for example, and even cortisol levels from workers that are working in this particular space. What do we see? So what is the value add? Well, people perform better. If you take spaces that have leveraged the WELL certification as a blueprint to design spaces well, pun intended. If you take, for example, classic SIG building syndrome kind of, aspects, well certified spaces will perform better from the building outcomes perception. but then even in terms of his tangible outcomes are coming from physical health, mental health, and also increased 15% uptick in terms of perceived productivity within these premises. People perceive that the organization actually performs better. So there is a very positive view coming from workers on when these organizations actually prioritize health and well-being as part of the way of working, and that becomes part of the organization footprint. And that is all the way from questions that we asked around how they perceive wellness policies, health promotion programs, inclusive culture, positive environment, and also the engagement within the organization. So there are many different ways of measuring these, such as some of them that we'll be bringing up. And spaces actually perform better as well. So if you take fit outs that actually prioritize design for health and well-being principles, they, based on the data that we have here in Australia, they are achieving 25% higher levels of utilization compared to all the same offers. We will have significant differences in terms of how it's utilized, but also how it's utilized compared to what average offers, particularly in Melbourne, which has a very low occupancy rate at the moment compared to other capital cities. We also found that workers seek the spaces with natural finishes, spaces that are timber rich, the greenery rich, and have proper daylight. They will be utilized 3 times more often, and they will stay 5 times longer within these spaces. So I think every single building owner or tenant, large organization that is trying to figure out what to do with the spaces that are actually not being properly utilized by people, they should definitely pay attention to some of these findings. So how to achieve that? What will be the key takeaways from the research? I think we find that research, it's integral. Having integration is important, and it's critical to be able to have health and well-being strategies implemented. So as I said earlier in the presentation, it should definitely be perceived as just a tick on a box, or something that you're doing for the sake of being doing. Workers can definitely see through that, and you're definitely not going to be able to harness the best out of it if you're not true to what you're actually saying, walk the talk. What we also find is our metrics need to evolve. So of course, a lot of the evidence that comes to try to analyze these spaces in organizations, workplaces, people, there are traditional metrics associated, take perceived productivity, for example, but also a lot of it stays within the indoor environmental quality domain. And we need to really consider other aspects, from space to people to place to ways of working. And how you're going to integrate that through the work that you're trying to achieve, and how you're going to achieve that, and then really going through the critical elements in PUDF to trying to understand what are the critical elements that are particularly important for your organization. But we just can't keep measuring the same thing the way that we have been measuring up to this point. I think there is a critical need to actually push a little bit further. We also need to build more evidence around the spaces that, if I take IWBI well as an example, there are about 400, these numbers keep changing every day, so excuse me if I'm not up to date, 400 million square meters of well-certified premises globally. And yet, I think it's about 11, 12 peer-reviewed papers as today that have been published with data coming from these premises. So of course, the certification is evidence-driven, it's scientifically informed, but actually trying to get to the premises to get data to see how these spaces are performed is particularly important, because WELL has been upheld by industry globally as a blueprint for you to achieve high performance. Our data supports that, but I think I'd like to see more. Not enough papers yet being published around the topic. And I think that's it for me. Jenna, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. It's a lot of some of the evidence and perspective that I think a lot of people are starting to understand a bit more with things like the well building standard. But yes, I love it. All right, well, thank you. Let's go ahead and we'll progress on to our next presenter. Marcella, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you now. And let me go ahead and I will do a quick introduction and then, I'll just read it and then we'll go from there, since you've already quickly shared your screen. You are on top of it. All right, so yes, next we have Professor Marcella Ucci. Talk title is Cognitive Performance and Indoor Air Quality, the Impact of CO2 and PM2.5 and Implications for Wellbeing. Dr. Ucci is professor in healthy and sustainable buildings at the UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering within the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment at University College London, or UCL in London. Professor Ucci graduated in architecture from the University of Naples and then obtained an MSc in environmental design and engineering and a PhD in indoor air quality and modeling, both from the Bartlett School of Graduate Studies at UCL. She researches how buildings should be designed, upgraded, and managed in order to support health and well-being, tackle inequalities, and reduce environmental impacts. Her expertise includes building performance monitoring and modeling, evaluation of indoor air quality, active design, and community engagement. She's led the development and launch of the new MSc in Health, Wellbeing, and Sustainable Buildings, of which she was course director between 2017 and 2019. She was chair and is now vice chair of the UK Indoor Environments Group and co-chairs the Health and Wellbeing Working Group in the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, or CIPSE. She is on the editorial board of Frontiers in Environmental Health and of Indoor and Built Environment, previously serving as deputy editor. Welcome, Marcella.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and you just need to do your screen on presentation mode. Yes, beautiful.
Okay, good morning from London. So my talk is going to be about cognitive performance as one dimension of well-being. And so briefly talking about the role of indoor air quality in cognitive performance, and bringing examples from research studies on particularly particulate matter 2.5 and carbon dioxide. So these are within subject crossover design intervention studies, and very briefly drawing out implication for design and further research. First of all, I should credit our brilliant UCL doctoral researchers, Jiashu Zhu and Didong Cheng, for the study respectively on PM2.5 and carbon dioxide, and they provided also some of the slides, so thank you to them. So the background to this topic is that the impacts of air pollution on health are well established. However, a lot of evidence is based on outdoor data. But we spend, of course, a lot of time indoors, and the impacts of indoor exposures to air quality are important. The effects on cognition and brain is less well evidenced. For example, the WHO updated its guidelines on a number of pollutants, including PM2.5 in 2021. But this was based primarily, in fact, only on mortality data. Of course, cognition and cognitive health is an important aspect of well-being, and both cognitive decline and cognitive performance are important aspects. Cognition is, of course, affected by several individual environmental factors, including potentially indoor air quality, but I think we can all relate, for example, to how we need to concentrate extra hard if there's a lot of noise in our surrounding. So, as I said, I will present two studies. The first one focusing on particulate matter PM2.5, and they are effectively two separate strands. One was a fieldwork office-based study and one lab setting, both targeting working age adults. Just as a reminder of the context of PM2.5 significance for indoor air. So the particular particles less than 2.5 micrometers can reach deep into our airways, and there is lots of evidence that they have established health effects particularly on respiratory and cardiovascular health. There are both natural and anthropogenic sources, indoor and outdoor. In office settings, typically most sources are outdoor, for example, from traffic, whereas in residential environments, there could also be indoor sources, for example, from cooking or from smoking. By comparison, however, there is less evidence on indoor exposures and cognitive health with respect to PM2.5. Now, part one of the study was, as I said, a fieldwork setting conducted in Beijing, China, in a mixed mode ventilated office. As I said, the source of PM2.5 was largely from outdoor. The intervention itself was portable air purifiers positioned on the participants' desks. And so when the air purifier was on, that is considered as the intervention. And when the air purifier is off, there was the control. Participants weren't necessarily aware that there was on and off, but there could have been some noise affecting their perception of this. I can't go over the nitty-gritty of the study design, but just to say that it was a crossover, randomized, single-blind design. There were almost 60 participants divided into a number of groups. And the measures that were taken, besides the environmental monitoring, was a questionnaire to ask about demographic information, perception of the environment. Then there was a cognitive testing, and also physiological responses were measured, particularly electrodermal activity and HRV, heart rate variability. I will not talk about those aspects, although there is a publication if you're interested. So in terms of the assessment of the cognitive performance, Cognifit was used, which is effectively a web-based platform which provides participants with a series of tasks that they need to perform. And these tasks are meant to test a wide range of cognitive domains across memory, attention, perception, coordination, and reasoning. And effectively, these tasks measure the speed and accuracy, not always both, but speed and or accuracy for these tasks. The lab study, on the other hand, was similar in terms of the measures that were taken, so the questionnaire, the physiological measurements, etc. But it was conducted in London. The key difference, one of the key differences was that the source of PM2.5 was unscented candles placed within the chamber itself. There was more control of the other environmental parameters, including temperature and relative humidity. And also HEPA filters were used with a sham filter method, which was better at controlling for potential placebo effects. Just to say that the intervention, the purifiers were effective at significantly reducing the PM2.5 levels. They were slightly different. There were different levels from the field and the lab. And also the exposure time between the two studies was different. But providing a very high-level summary of the findings, here the yes and the no refers to whether there was a statistically significant difference between the control and intervention setting, i.e., in other words, whether there was a difference between the low and the high PM2.5 concentration condition across these domains. And so, as you can see, there were consistent effects between the field and the lab across all of the memory domain skills. And some in the attention domain. There were no differences in reasoning and coordination, and some mixed effects around perception. And I should say the effect sizes were small to medium. Just to say that in terms of the questionnaire work, this is only from the field data that I'm presenting. There were significant differences in perception of air quality, satisfaction of air quality, and also productivity. And also we found that there was, for example, a correlation between self-reported productivity, a positive correlation, and indoor air quality satisfaction and perception. Now, study 2, on the other hand, focused on carbon dioxide. This was only in a lab setting, I should say. So again, a reminder of the significance of this pollutant. There are both natural and anthropogenic sources, and there is a certain amount of CO2 in ambient air anyway, but humans also breathe, emit CO2, and that's why in buildings, CO2 is often used as a proxy of ventilation, because effectively, if we know there are lots of people in a room and CO2 is relatively low, we know that the ventilation is sufficient because the CO2 is getting diluted. But of course, CO2 should not be used uniquely as an indicator of good ventilation. There are lots of studies on CO2 and performance. We know that at the sorts of level that CO2 is present in building types such as homes and schools and offices, CO2 is not dangerous per se, but there's been a lot of debate as to whether CO2 could affect cognitive performance in its own right. There are no established, for example, WHO guidelines on this. But for example, in the UK, the recent Part F for a building regulation recommends that in non-domestic building, CO2 is measured as an indicator of ventilation. And in this case, they suggest that the 800 ppm is likely to indicate that the space is well ventilated. And I should say that this is not taken, this value is not taken based on cognitive performance, for example, but at the time it was also in relation to risk transmission from COVID. So why is this issue important? Because in order to keep low CO2 levels, so we need to ventilate more. This means using more energy. At the same time, there is evidence that background levels of CO2 in ambient air are rising. But some study designs change CO2 levels by changing ventilation, and therefore we don't know what's happening with other pollutants. On the other hand, in the UCL study, CO2 was injected in the chamber as a pure pollutant, and participants were exposed to 3 levels of CO2. With a crossover design. The ventilation rate was stable, temperature and humidity were also stable. Cognitive performance was measured by a different cognitive battery than the other study that I mentioned. It was measured by bars. And the results were in essence that no statistically significant differences were found between the low and the high condition of CO2 exposure across cognitive performance, acute health symptoms, perceived indoor air quality. And so, at least in this study, there were no evidence that CO2 as a pollutant has an impact. This is perhaps in contrast with another study well known from Harvard that did find some differences, but a reminder that they measured cognitive performance in a slightly different way. And so they might have also measured different dimensions of cognitive performance. So this is my last slide with some summary and reflections. So there is some evidence that elevated particulate matter 2.5 could affect cognitive performance, but particularly domain and memory and aspects of attention. But of course, the study was focusing on a particular population type. In most participants were, for example, very well educated, and it was slightly more on the younger age range. And also more research is needed on understanding the dose-response relationships. Also, those cognitive batteries that we've used cannot be easily translated in terms of their quantities onto direct productivity. So, you know, if an organization wants to know, yeah, but in practice, you know, you found that there is this difference. How is this going to affect the productivity on my workforce who, for example, makes phone calls, etc.? The translation to real practice needs a bit more work. Nonetheless, PM2.5 should be kept as low as possible, and we know this from other health outcomes anyway. And the design solutions to achieve these largely depends on whether the source is outdoor, indoor, or both, because could be ventilation or could be filtration or both. There is still much debate, on the other hand, on the impacts of CO2 on cognitive performance at mid to low levels, although you will encounter people who have strong beliefs, I want to say, on either side of the theories. Nonetheless, caution is needed to try and keep CO2 very low, because this does have an impact on other sustainability aspects. And finally, although we know that the perception of indoor air quality should not be considered by itself as an indicator of indoor air quality, because some pollutants, for example, cannot be smelled, this perception could nonetheless play a role in self-reported productivity and or performance. So there are a number of publications that provide a lot more details than what I was able to do today. And I would be happy to answer any questions now or later on. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcella. And you were right on time. I was just about to tell you 12 minutes, and then you were like, oh, last slide. So yes, thank you for that. All right, we will pause the questions for later and proceed to Rianne. So let me go ahead, add spotlight, remove spotlight, and then let's see. Rianne, if you want to share your screen while I introduce you, shall we do that? Okay, we'll multitask. All right, so next, well, finally, we have Associate Professor Rianne Appel-Meulenbroek. I keep attempting the name pronunciation. I hope that's all right. Talk title is Supportive Workplace Settings at the Office and at Home, which is based on an analysis of over 50,000 worker surveys on experience supportive activities in relation to workplace design at home and in the office. So Dr. Appel-Meulenbroek is an associate professor at Eindhoven University of Technology, specializing in corporate real estate and workplace management. Her research examines how workspace design impacts employee well-being, productivity, and organizational innovation. She uses advanced methods like choice experiments and sensor-based measurements. Rianne is the founder of the Transdisciplinary Workplace Research Network and co-editor of the Transdisciplinary Workplace Research and Management book series. She's also involved in the Center for Humans and Technology and actively engages with both academic and professional communities through publications and conferences. Welcome, Rianne.
Thank you. I've shared my slides, so I'm assuming you can see them.
Yes,
Indeed,
perfect.
I'm going to talk about how workplace settings support people and particularly their activities, task profiles, and productivity. And I'm going to show you two different analyses we did with data from Leesman with a very large data set that they have gathered throughout the world. And why did we look at this? Particularly because we see that in hybrid working studies, we are not very clear always on the types of workplace settings that we are studying there, and also what their effects are. And both at the office and at the home workplace, there are of course different types of settings that people can be having to work in. And also particularly there's not often a very detailed look of the activities that they are doing and the task profiles if they are doing many different activities. And yeah, while the Leesman data does provide all this information, we thought it could be interesting to study that in more detail. Theoretically, I guess our study is a bit based on the theory of affordances, that says that the characteristics of the physical workplace are perceived by the people that use this place and also determine whether they are enabled to perform certain behaviors, so to perform certain activities. And yeah, we know that knowledge workers have a wide range of activities, and they might, the ones with lots of different activities might require different office environments than the ones that only do one or two types of tasks. So these are the ideas underlaying our study. And the first paper that we wrote about it, you can find in the proceedings of the TWR Network conference proceedings of last year. It's a short paper, and you can find through this link the proceedings of all our conferences with lots of health papers. And what we did here is that we compared people that filled in at the same moment a survey about their office and about their home workplace, so getting a bit of a comparison between that. And they did so during the COVID pandemic, and we had a little bit over 57,000 workers. And they were asked questions by Leesman about personal characteristics, about 21 different activities, whether they are important to them, and also whether they feel supported in them, and also what workplace settings they have. And this is what you see in the table. In blue, you see all the workplace settings that they can pick from. And we are showing that based on the Kronenthal division of types of workplaces based on location, layout, and use, that all are present within the data set, so that we were able to find all kind of both dedicated and flexible environments and closed and open environments to look at. There was also a question in the survey whether they agreed on the statement, the home or office workplace enables me to work productively. So this is asked separately for the home and the office. So on this, we did ANOVAs, we did a cluster analysis to see if we could find different task variety profiles and study their support. And if we look at our sample, it's a little bit male dominated, but yeah, there's 57,000 people, so also lots of females in it, all ages, and generally a bit longer tenures. There were a few people having tenure less than 3 years. If we look at the office types, you see them in the table here, how many respondents per type, and every type has lots of people to show what this means for them. In the office, we saw a lot of flexible open work environments, about 35% of the sample, but also assigned open work environments. So most of the offices these days, of course, are open. At home, we saw mostly dedicated workspaces, either enclosed for 45% or open. And when we asked about their productivity support, here you see the mean productivity support in the office and also at home for the different settings. And we can see that overall, home productivity support is perceived slightly higher, which we have seen in many studies. We also interestingly saw that it was significantly different for all settings, except the other category, which is of course very diverse. The enclosed environments in general performed the best in people's opinion, and only the non-dedicated home workplace settings score lower than the top 2 of the office settings, and still higher than all the non-dedicated office settings. So we can really see that this dedicated seating is still something that people really like, and also having enclosed environments, both at home and in the office. We also see when we looked at activity support that all activities were supported significantly different between the office and the home workplace. The best supporter at home of activities are, of course, being on the phone, reading, and creative thinking. While in the office, we saw things like informal social interaction, hosting visitors, collaborating, these kind of things. And this is all very logical. But the most interesting, I guess, I thought was that the individual desk-based focused work and the planned meetings, which is most of the work of most people, were important for most people, and they were also well supported both at the office and home, and also similarly. So we couldn't really see this forming any preference of people. It's rather the other activities that decide maybe why people go to the office or not. When we looked at task variety, you see the 21 activities and how many people ticked as having as an activity. We see about 1,000 people saying, I only have one activity, generally individual focused desk-based work, but also lots of people having more activities, and a few thousand even saying all these 21 activities are important for my work. And so they have very complex task profiles. Here you can see that we did a cluster analysis, and the 4-cluster solution was the best, and that there are substantial amounts of the sample in every cluster, so that they are very relevant in many organizations. And then when we ask them about productivity support at the office and at home, we see again significant different support experienced by these clusters, and particularly the cluster that's mainly focused on concentration, but also the one on concentration and meetings. So the ones with more simpler task profiles particularly love the home even more than the other two. If we look at the ones that like the office the most, it's still less than at home, but it's the ones combining concentration activities with more collaborative work, like learning from others. And they are less involved in online activities as well. And then sadly, I should say that the one we called various activities, that cluster didn't feel particularly well supported either at home or in the office. So they are, I guess, suffering the most. We also did another study, a more advanced study on this data set that we published in Building and Environment. So here you can see the title and the link to it. And in this, we involved even more variables from the data set, also questions on the importance, and if it's important, also about the satisfaction of all kind of physical design features. 11 features of the home workplace and 24 for the office workplace. And we ran a PAT model to see how all these things are interlinking. And what you see here, this is the best fit model that we found from this, and I will try to run you through it a little bit because it has lots of information I can understand. So if we look at satisfaction at home, let's see, you see 4 columns on the left, personal and workplace settings. Then next, the satisfaction at home at the top and the satisfaction at office at the bottom. Then the third column, so to say, is the perceived support. Again, home at the top and office at the bottom. And then the last, we see the productivity support that's perceived at home at the office. And when we look at satisfaction, it indeed increases significantly the support of both all kinds of activities that are important for people and also their productivity, both the satisfaction at home, having particular effects also on the productivity at home and the support of all kinds of activities, but also the satisfaction at the office, especially things like crowdedness really impacted concentrated work at the office and the feeling of support of productivity at the office. That's what we see. We also see that when people have more activities feeling like they are supported, they also feel that their productivity is better supported by the workplace at home and at the office. So this works as well as expected. What we also see that the perceived support at home and at the office are interrelated. So it is also suggest if you really like your home office, and that's what we see happening these days, that you are not so inclined to go to the office than when you don't like your home office, and also, of course, the other way around. We also, from this analysis, kind of saw a less good thing, I guess, for productivity studies, because we saw that employees mainly seem to determine their productivity based on whether their individual concentrative work is supported, while we all, of course, know that collaborative work also influences our individual productivity support. So this is something that we didn't we expected it a bit, and this was one of the first studies to confirm this. What I already said, if you really perceive one workplace as positive, the other might be conceived as less positive because of that, because the other workplace is so much nicer. So my last slide with implications, besides workplace location, we do see that also the layout and how flexible the use of the office is related to perceived productivity support, both at home and at the office. So we would recommend corporate real estate managers to invest and incorporate in sufficient different types of workplaces in the office, and not just make this club office where we can all collaborate and interact, but we also still have to do lots of other tasks there. And future studies, I think, should particularly look at how to support all the task profiles, also the more complex ones, because so many of us seem to have a very diverse job, so to say. So that was it. And we, of course, thankful to Liesman for sharing the data with us. And I guess we can open the floor for questions to all of us. I will stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rianne. That was lovely. I hadn't seen some of that data come up, and it reminded me of some of the well-being science studies I've seen about work spillover. Have you heard about that within happiness research? That
Work spillover?
Spillover, like to
Spill
have
over.
something overflow. So the impact of work, happiness, and well-being can sometimes impact how you feel about your home and vice versa. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oh, really good. Okay, I'm going to add spotlights to all of you, and we're going to get some Q&A going. Okay, I think all four of us should be up now. I haven't seen any questions come through on the chat or Q&A, but if somebody would like to raise their hand and ask some questions, we can go ahead and get that going. And we are going to try to end right on time, so let's not be too shy tonight. Try to dive right in.
I can't find my virtual hand, Jenna, but I would love to ask a question.
Go for it, Amy.
Hi to all three of you. Thank you so much for those wonderful, insightful talks. My name's Amy. I'm a psychologist at the University of Melbourne. I have questions for all of you, but maybe I'll just start at the beginning and just do one, and we'll see who else chimes in so I don't hog the floor. Professor Candido, I'm wondering if the practice of kind of determining causation is standard practice yet? Like, can we be sure that that it is the physical design of the environment, or is it that workplaces that are evidence-based, avant-garde in their thinking about evidence-based, who are going to look into the the physical design are more likely to also have good workplace practices, or also more likely to prioritize other aspects of their employees' well-being that wraps around all of that? I'm just wondering if that is it easy to tease apart? Is it standardly done? What are your thoughts?
No, can't point to causality in short. I think everything that we do, it points to directions of things that seem to be working. But as you pointed out, there are so many different factors. Some of them they'll be dominant at different points in time. Of course, as much as we want to push for the performance of the space itself, we know there are so many different layers that will be really driving what workers are thinking in a point in time, which we all can relate to ourselves as part of our work. But I think it gives you, directions. So of what should be, try at least what you should be striving towards. But no, unfortunately, we can't really be it is the best of our abilities to actually point to causality now. That'll be responsible to say that. Yeah. Rianne is shaking her head.
What I'm always telling my students, I'm always talking about a mechanism instead of a causation. So it's a mechanism that space can trigger, supporting the employees in all kinds of aspects, but it's not necessarily happening in every context, because there are so many other variables that we also cannot always all measure. So yeah, it's a matter of finding the trigger of the mechanism to make it work. And that's of course also difficult or different for different people.
Yeah, thanks.
Marcella, did you want to weigh in?
Well, I suppose one thing that I was thinking is interesting, Rianne, you were using the word support, because of course in my world, which is perhaps more about, IEQ and sometimes engineering, occasionally one says your productivity is improved by, and then we need to remember that in fact it is not improved. If anything, in my opinion anyway, the physical environment can also take away from it, but it's slightly because that's more innate to your own capacity, etc. And so I think it's also, it might be that it's easier to see when productivity is negatively affected by the physical environment rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and that's what we are particularly have been trying in the past 4 years with a PhD project of Lisanne Bergenvoort, who's now my colleague as assistant professor, really trying to look at mental health from a positive, salutogenic approach, and really the flourishing of people. And I think it's really interesting. We did a systematic review, for example. There's very little research on this more tacit well-being, opposed to getting sick from buildings.
What I find fascinating, and I would love to hear Rianne and Marcella's views on this, is it's a lot harder to actually do that. So concentrating on the negative makes the news and gets the results published much easier than when actually trying to tap into the positive. And how, because if we actually tap into the positive, which is a lot harder to do and do well, you can actually move the needle, because you will start to also find directions that are useful to those who are trying to implement that. Like we are here trying to analyze what is being done, but it's a lot easier to just keep trashing acoustics in open plan offices. But then to try to actually have positive and then showing how it should be done, it's a lot harder, isn't it? I mean, even from a research design perspective, but also I find it more motivating and more useful in a way to give back and try to move the needle, shift the needle towards that. Is that how you feel as well?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's also part of the business case. I'm a real estate scholar by origin, so there's a business case to be made to the CFO of the organization by workplace managers, and if you can put more positive findings in it and not just avoiding negative things, which are also, of course, covered a lot by all kind of norms, especially in the Netherlands. We love rules and norms. So there's all kind of building codes that you have to meet, and the difficulty, I think, of all these positive things is that they are also all interrelated. We have a large data set that we collected together with the Center for People and Buildings in Delft on hybrid workers, and we have been doing all kind of path models on this data set as well, and are trying even to use machine learning to just understand the complexity of the whole mix of variables in this, because everything seems to connect to everything, and yeah, it's difficult to draw meaningful conclusions for it that convince companies to improve.
Yeah, I think that's why Amy's question was quite interesting, right? Because effectively you were saying, could it simply be that a more enlightened organization also happens to be in a more in a better physical environment, and what matters the most, right? And definitely, if one has to try and look at that as a study design, we would need, you know, several buildings, several different types of different organizations, but then some way of standardizing the collection, and there would be clustering, etc. So it's not of course impossible to do, but I guess it would be quite a big data set that would require a lot of data gathering, because we want to capture, you know, the physical environment, the perception, the culture, etc. So certainly there's always been this innate question about what matters the most, and if I need to, which one do I need to, you know, invest the most? And I don't think we've answered that in terms of, you know, there was a study years and years ago in the UK from civil servants that was looking more at sick building syndrome in that side of things, and whether they had the physical environment had more of an impact versus the management support. And the latter appeared to be more important in sick building syndrome, which I appreciate is a slightly contested notion now anyway. But nonetheless, we often find that most organizations, they do things well. They do well across the board. And then there is messiness in the middle, and then that's, you know, and maybe it's the messiness in the middle that is harder to tease out.
We generally see on the data set that I was saying, that I didn't present on today, that the psychosocial work environment has a bigger influence than the physical work environment on all kind of both individual and organizational goals. Also things like team collaboration and engagement. And but we do always see that the physical work environment particularly seems to make the psychosocial work environment work. And so it has a kind of supportive role there on its own, and maybe not always direct or not the largest one, say in path modeling. All relations that might be significant but not that big also at a certain point disappear, and you only keep the strongest ones. And there we always see that the psychosocial environment is mainly influencing these things, but the physical environment creates the possibility to create a good psychosocial environment.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the beauty that so much of us like to cover of our participant group, is that difficult area of the quantitative and qualitative, the gray areas that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary folks really try to get into. So yeah, thank you so much. Great question, Amy. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, let's see if we can do another. So Magdalena, did you have a question, or are you just commenting? Let me see if I can read. I agree with the importance of a positive message in a work environment. It is the power of data that will allow for change and investment. I need to go now. Oh, she had to go. So maybe she's not even on. I can't even see. All right. Sohail Jabari. Oh, very nice. Expressing heartfelt appreciation, always helpful. All right. Do we have any other questions? Looks like at the very end.
There was a question in that question about
what
Sohail's analysis software did you use? So we didn't use an analysis software as such. I mean, we use statistical methods. So I believe the doctoral researcher used R, I believe, or maybe SPSS, I can't remember which, for that particular study. But so the core data was monitor data for the IAQ, and then there was analysis, statistical analysis of that. That makes sense.
Great, thank you. Well, if nobody else has a question, I'm just going to maybe end with one of my own, if you don't mind. So one of the reasons that we had this and brought everybody together, all three of you are part of the FxD community. We wanted to represent more of a building science, architectural science foundation. So I appreciate you all generously giving your time and speaking to that today. So I'm kind of just curious to get your perspective on what you think the future of building science is in general, and maybe even in the context of flourishing. So maybe we can work our way backwards. Rianne, would you like to go first?
My computer wouldn't unmute, sorry. Yeah, the future of building science. Yeah, I was just putting in the chat about the TWR network. I think we will become more and more transdisciplinary because, as Marcella was already saying, doing things in labs versus field studies, it's important to get practice involved in our research as well. And yeah, with the growing complexity and behavioral insights of workers, and yeah, I think we are going to combine more and more disciplines, which which I'm also noticing is complex. It's not making it easier to decide what to ask from people and what not if you're doing surveys, or what to measure in a building. And yeah, I'm hoping that technology will increase in helping there. We have a new professor in my group that's into AI, so that's why I'm trying to see if we can have some machine learning in our field. I think it could be really interesting. Yeah, if that can help us.
Excellent. So transdisciplinarity and maybe technology to augment. All right,
Yeah.
Marcella, would you go with next? I know you have a meeting.
So my first thought to that question was that, again, from the side of indoor environmental quality, traditionally every single aspect is looked at in isolation. So what's the impact of thermal comfort? What's the impact of noise? But we know that there are multisensory correlations, so integrations across these aspects on our perception, and then how they translate on well-being. So I can see that in that field, there's going to be the need for more understanding of how these synergies work. And then at the other end, there's a lot of interest in the brain, how it functions, and there are easier ways now to monitor it, although, I can't claim to understand them all. So there might be more integration of kind of physiology and brain science with environmental science and, of course, building science.
Yeah, it's a great point. I know UCL with Hugo Spears, there's a lot of work going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I know Rianne is because of Sophie and people I know through Moving Boundaries. So yeah, very well put. Chris?
No, I agree with everything that's being said. I think we need to go beyond buildings. I think I think there is a side of, yes, bringing different expertise, different conversation points of view to the table, but also the focus on, even why building the buildings, who is actually occupying it, what are we doing, and then the longevity of that particular artifact. And then I think going beyond the methods that we currently have and the metrics that we have, and really get very creative about not only how we measure, but how we also promote that particular information beyond the academic audience. So I think a lot of that is already happening, but I would see that just become even more important in not in the future, but actually now, because a lot of these results, some of the aspects that Marcella was talking about, it's particularly relevant if you're living in a changing climate world. So I think these things will definitely speed up.
Well, I think that's a lovely place to leave it. I want to make sure that we can get into some of those more difficult conversations, and transdisciplinarity and everything else really lends itself towards that approach. Well, thank you so much for generously offering your time and speaking to everybody tonight, ladies, or this morning in your cases.
Thank you, Jenna, for running it so professionally and smoothly.
Oh, yes, thank you. No, it's always a fun balance, but I'm glad that it went through pretty smoothly. And yeah, we'll be offering this up for the recording, but I'll chat with you all on your comfort level with respect to that afterwards. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you all.